The senator from New Jersey.
I'm grateful to stand here tonight, Madam President, but I would like to ask unanimous consent that floor access is granted to my communications director, Jeff Geertz, father of two amazing daughters. On his Christmas card, it was so moving to me. He should be home with them at this late hour, but I'm hoping you'll give him permission to be on the floor without objection. And to my chief of staff, who does not have two beautiful daughters, but has a lot of plants that need watering. She should probably be home doing that, but I'd like to get her a permission to be on the Senate floor as well.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Madam President, I rise today to give a speech like I never given before. It's really important that I do it on the Senate floor, but it's like I've never done before because I'm actually giving a speech to two young children who may not watch this for years, but I want them to hear from me. These are two young boys, Osmir and Zaran. And I write them, I give a sort of open speech to them tonight, really out of joy and faith that is untroubled by my hurt and my sadness. You see, I think something about this country that so many people have come to know, who've seen the worst of America but still love America, they know how these emotions sit side by side. That you could hold sadness and joy next to faith in this nation, even though there's disappointment. And what I rise to talk to these two young boys about is their dad. Their dad is a man named Adeel Mangi. He is an extraordinary man. I've met many people from New Jersey, but this man was so extraordinary that the President of the United States of America chose him because of his qualifications to be a justice on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. That was why he was chosen, but he also happened to be a glass ceiling breaker. He also happened to be somebody that was going to make American history as the first ever Muslim judge, man of Muslim faith, to be on the circuit court. Now, this is extraordinary that it's 2024 and we've never had someone of the Muslim faith, especially because we're a nation that says there's no religious tests. We're founded in this ideal of religious freedom, but somehow with the millions of American Muslims, with Muslims being here at our founding, all through American history, Muslims fighting in every war in American history, we've never had a Muslim ascend to the circuit courts. I'd like to read from a letter that your father wrote. It's really powerful. I wish I could read the whole thing, and I'd like to, if with the permission of the president, I'd like to submit the whole letter into the official record of the United States Senate.
Without objection.
And so here he writes about his nomination. When my nomination came before the Senate Judiciary Committee, I was prepared to answer any questions about my qualifications, philosophy, legal issues, but I received none. Instead, I was asked questions about Israel, whether I supported Hamas, and whether I celebrated the anniversary of 9/11. Even more revealing, however, was the tone. The underlying premise appeared to be that because I am Muslim, surely I support terrorism and celebrate 9/11. When I made clear all these claims are false, that I condemn the Hamas attacks and all forms of terrorism, and indeed that it was my city that was attacked on 9/11, the next Republican senators up just repeated the performative outrage. There were children in the audience. These attacks nonetheless continued endlessly for a simple reason. As Senator Whitehouse revealed on the Senate floor, this was an organized smear campaign fueled by dark money. But it did not end there. After Jewish groups came to my defense, these same attackers pivoted their focus to a new absurdity, claiming that I supported the killing of police officers, silently underpinned, in my view, by the notion that as a Muslim, I surely support violence, including against law enforcement. Now, your father goes on to detail not only how this incredible, outrageous smear attacks were false and no basis for it, how he's actually been someone who has stood up in his legal career in pursuit of justice, how he had the support of dozens of police organizations, attorney generals from around the country, bipartisan groups of current and former attorney generals, law enforcement groups, and more. He ends his letter with the conclusion that these tactics succeeded in stopping him from even getting a vote on the Senate floor, from ascending to the Third Circuit and making history. And your father concluded his letter by saying a truth. Our country faces an incoming tsunami of bigotry and hatred and discrimination. It targets Muslims, Arabs, Jews, Black people, the LGBTQ community, and many others. And this is not in the letter, but I remind people that hate crimes are on the rise across our country. Back to his letter, Osmir and Zarin, back to your father's letter, and it always pretends to be something other than what it is. These forces are fueled not only by their proponents, but equally by the collaboration and the silence of the spineless. They can be defeated only by those who lead voters with courage, not with who sacrifice principles for votes. But courage can be found outside of politics. American Muslims are part of this nation's fabric and will not cower. This campaign was intended to make it intolerable for Muslims, proud of their identity, to serve this nation. It will fail. Our Constitution forbids religious tests for any office of the United States, and American Muslims will cherish that fundamental value even if others apply it only selectively. Your father continues, I have battled for justice even if it meant there would be none for me. I read that line, Osmir and Zarin, I read that line and it gave me chills because it reminded me of my own family and stories of people who fought for justice that they would never enjoy. It reminded me of the history in this country when suffrage leaders fought for the vote for black men, the suffrage for blacks, and they would not enjoy it as women. It reminds me of so many Americans who still stood up for principles and ideals that our country proclaims even when they would not enjoy them. Osmir and Zarin, your father continues, the unfortunate fact remains we have a fundamentally broken process for choosing federal judges. There is no longer a system for evaluating fitness for judicial office. It is now a channel for the raising of money based upon performative McCarthyism before video cameras and for the dissemination of dark money-funded attacks that especially target minorities. None of the nominees pay the price, and so does our nation. Who will give up the rewards of private sector success for public service if the added price is character assassination and the wading through a senatorial swamp like this one? This process must be reinvented to protect nominees from threats, both reputational and physical, in an era of congressional dishonor, where disinformation reigns and all decency has been abandoned. I set forth this record of my experience and my opinions so that this playbook will be recognized the next time, and there will be a next time, a Muslim is nominated to a prominent position of service. He ends with this: to return to President Eisenhower's words, Americans must now look at the story of this nomination and ask themselves, is this who we are? And to these two young boys, he ends, for my children, I hope America one day lives up to President Eisenhower's promise, even if not today. For my part, I entered this nomination process as a proud American and a proud Muslim. I exit the process the same way, unbowed. Osmir and Zarin, I remember this day and the excitement I felt when I walked into that hearing room, these wood-paneled, historic chamber. I remember how it signaled to visitors the gravity of the business that was about to be conducted within the walls, and you two were seated in the front row, just behind your dad. I remember the joy I felt when I saw the two of you, that you were going to witness the ascendancy of your father to the highest court in the land, and you two were going to witness the smashing of a barrier and seeing your father, a proud American who happens to be Muslim, become the first. I remember your smiles. I remember how they made my whole being smile. Your mother sat beside you, beaming with pride. I sat on the dais, so full of joy. And the hearing began. I told your dad I didn't know why he asked you to leave the room. I wanted you to stay for the whole hearing. But your mom and dad, wise beyond me, had you leave. And at your young age then, I am glad you did not witness what then transpired. It was shameful, not for your family, it was shameful for us as senators, it was shameful for America. You heard your father detail the remarks and the questions that were so degrading and demeaning. They weren't successful. They couldn't degrade or demean the character of your father, but they were degrading and demeaning. Questions that have never been asked in all of American history to a nominee. Did you support 9/11, the terrorist attacks that he witnessed? How insulting was that? And they were repeated over and over, demeaning and degrading, attempting to, but your father's character can never be demeaned, can never be degraded, because he stood tall on that day. And in a history in this country of so many women and black men and immigrants and Irish and Italian and Catholics and Asian Americans, Japanese and Chinese who have been insulted and looked down upon and faced bigotry, your father, like generations of other Americans who were told they weren't good enough because they were different, your father stood in the saddle and took the assaults, and he never, ever, ever backed down. Calmly and repeatedly, he answered the inane questions. The darkness directed towards him, he showed his light. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you over and over again how brilliant your father is, how he got to that seat. Amidst thousands of talented lawyers across your country, your father stood out to the President of the United States as one of the best. He is a top litigator. He's cherished by his colleagues. His legal acumen and intellect were part of the reasons I recommended him, because all throughout my state, On both sides of the aisle, people told me how amazing your father was, how talented your father was, how this was a layup for the court, how he would elevate the judiciary. And what people said about him wasn't just his legal acumen, they also talked about your dad's character. A man who lives by his principles. How he even stood up to the government when it was discriminating against others because they were different. How he represented people that had no one to stand up for their values. He stood up for a man named Carl Taylor, who was held in prison and beaten to death by correctional officers. Not only did your dad win that lawsuit for Mr. Taylor's family, but he helped protect other incarcerated people in New York by having all of the prisons agree to install video cameras to stop attacks like that one from ever happening again, to protect other lives. Your father has this unrelenting commitment to the ideal of fairness and justice. He's modeled his life after that. He doesn't just believe these things, he acts in accordance with them. New Jersey is lucky to have him on our state bar. And we would have been lucky to have him on the Third Circuit. My mom says something about me that I think is funny. My mom says behind every successful child is an astonished parent. But I will never be surprised by the two of you. I think you two, knowing your parents, are going to grow up to be extraordinary light workers in this nation. James Baldwin said, "Children are never good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them." I have this faith in the two of you, and the reason why I'm doing this, standing on the Senate floor, talking to two New Jersey children, teenage boys, 14 and 13, the reason why I'm talking to you is because I know who you are with only meeting you on that day. Because you were raised by these model citizens, by these great Americans whose character shined amidst the darkness of the storm that your family went through. Your father was professionally attacked for months and months and months. He was trolled on the internet. He faced streams of hate as people built entire million-dollar campaigns to try to discredit him, and yet your dad and your mom never faltered and never flinched, told the President of the United States that they would continue in the process if the President believed that it was still possible for him to serve his nation. It's these attributes of your parents that I know live in you. And I guess I want you all never to stop believing like your parents do, in not just the attributes that mark your family and distinguish it, but in those attributes of our nation that we can never stop believing in. This great body failed your father. It failed the American people. It is one of the most painful chapters I've had in public life. The American people deserve a government that just doesn't function in accordance to fairness, but upholds the ideals that are so core to this country that everyone is created equal. That there should be liberty and justice for all. That's not what happened in this episode. It's not what happened to your dad. He was treated differently because of his faith. Bigotry was used to attempt to demean him. Lies were used to discredit him. The broken political system was used to dissuade and intimidate people from standing up for him. It was a dark moment in the Senate's history, I tell you this. But your father, whose character I believed in before the process, has shown a character that inspires me now more than ever. I want to ask you two to never stop believing in the ideals of this nation because it is why your father is who he is. Your parents told me their fealty to America, their love of this country has unfaltered. And it's this great tradition of people who love America so much, even when America doesn't love them back. It's people in this country, from McCarthyism to the bigotry and hate of slavery, who kept working to change this country and make it better. I ask the two of you to embrace your parents' way, to love America, to believe in her, and to know that this nation needs you and your family. I believe sometimes we have the most difficult moments to make way for better days ahead. I believe in people and their potential and ability to make a difference. We are in a moment right now where too many leaders in our country subscribe to a politics of division. We are in a moment where we're seeing a rise of hate. I think it's an inflection point. And I think this is the point, and perhaps yours is the generation, to take our nation in a better direction. I believe in many ways your dad's steadfast love of country and the fact that he is unbowed by this process, I think that that is, in many ways, the foundation that's going to help us as a nation go forward. I want to end with you with a poem my parents read me. I told your dad, and I got emotional when I talked to him earlier today, that when I looked at the two of you, I saw my brother and me. Carrie and I were raised by two parents, the first ever to integrate an all-white neighborhood. My parents faced the same kind of awful indignities as many people who are different, that they weren't allowed to buy their house. They had to get a white couple to pose as them. I was just a baby at that time, in order to be the first black family to move in. On the day of the closing of the house, when the white couple didn't show up, and my father did, and a lawyer, like your father, the real estate agent didn't capitulate. He actually punched the lawyer in the face and sigged a Doberman Pinscher on my dad. We eventually got the owners of the home to sell us the house and moved in, but my parents were conscious my entire childhood that there's hate in this world, there's bigotry in this world. It was the tunnel that you had to come through to be in the very house you live, but they never wanted us to stop loving America and loving other people. They wanted us to know that there are going to be times in life where you're going to face hatred, and that will never define you. What will define you is how you respond to it. And what your father gave America is a master's class on how to respond to lies, bigotry, and hatred, organized and financed. What your father showed is in that darkness, he could bring light. And so my parents, who wanted me to be like your dad in life, that if I faced the worst bigotry and hate, that I did not stop loving, that I did not stop loving others and loving Americans, they would find ways to inspire me. And so I want to read you all one of the poems my parents shared me. Not the whole poem, but a few sections. And it's a woman named Maya Angelou. And it's a poem called Still I Rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Just like the moons and like suns, with the certainty of the tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling. I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear. I rise into a daybreak that's wonderfully clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of a slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. To two young men growing up in a great nation, to Osmir and Zarin, I rise today to tell you that this is a great nation, to remind you that your Father has made it greater, and to tell you that I am full of hope, that the two of you will rise up and help our nation redeem its difficult past and seize for itself an even greater future. God bless the two of you. Inshallah, you two will make America even greater. Madam President, I yield the floor.